Do you find yourself going to see Avatar films without knowing why you're going? And when you exit through the cinema doors at the end, you can't remember character names and faces and even what really happened? If so, you are not alone. Why does something this expensive, this successful, and this everywhere leave such little impact? I wanted to put my finger on why, not the symptoms, but the cause. And strangely, I found the answer not in Avatar, but in a small creative decision made in Return of the Jedi. Yes, really. In this episode, we'll look at how that decision exposes a fatal dramatic weakness running through 3 Avatar films now, what it has to do with this, and a storytelling mistake Hollywood has been repeating for decades. The reason that question mark is there is because this argument is not so easy to answer. I, like many others, get a real kick out of James Cameron movies. He very successfully trades in the simple and the big and the memorable. But the Avatar series lives in my head more like half-remembered dreams than memories, and I couldn't quite figure out why. I kept asking myself, what is my problem? I mean, $100 billion tells me I must be wrong, right? But that's only if you measure the success of a story by box office, and there are all kinds of things that influence box office that have nothing to do with the quality of the storytelling. There are 2 scenarios here. Either I'm just not into Avatar the same way I don't like olives, and lots of people love olives, or there's something inherently wrong with Avatar, and I'm the Cassandra cursed to know the truth but never to be believed. So here I set out to put my finger on it, and before we get to what finally answered the question for me, I'll go through some of the contributing factors I wrestled with first. Walk with me. Yes, colour. In Avatar, this is not a trivial thing. The sumptuous, bordering on lurid colours of this world are part of the brand. They're a selling point. James Cameron's side hustle is deep-sea exploration, and its influences are everywhere in Avatar, but most especially in the colours and patterns, which are myriad, saturated, and even luminescent. Now, where I grew up, which is in the bush, bright colours and patterns in nature meant danger. Really bad, kill you danger. As a kid, when I saw them, I froze in my tracks. So it might just be a hangover from that, some limbic part of my brain resisting the colours on screen as not good. Of course, this does not a bad film make. It's not James Cameron's fault. I had to wiggle a stick in my shoes before I put them on to make sure there were no spiders inside. But he might have intuited that bright colours and crazy patterns in nature are often a warning sign, and in one place he indeed leans into it. It's actually used to great effect on the Ash Queen and her clan, who are painted the red colour of dangerous spiders, and the Queen's headdress too resembles the frilled neck of a reptile. This is an example of colour and patterns serving the drama, and I'll come back to how the Ash clan are doing that in more ways than one later on. So, colour is a contributing factor, but you can hardly call it what's wrong with Avatar. For that, we must widen the scope. Cameron has thrown everything at this world. If an animal on Earth has 2 eyes, its Pandora counterpart has 4. Where regular marine animals might have 4 fins, Avatar's has 6. 2 wings on Earth, let's have 8. And multiply that by the countless colours and patterns and textures we spoke about earlier, and then multiply all of that by the number of characters, of which there are legion. I'm not saying this doesn't show great imagination, and it's what sci-fi fantasy is all about, but there is just so much detail on the creatures, on the fauna, and on the rocks, and in the forest, and in the sea, and the sky, filling every inch of the frame, all layered on top of each other in different opacities and moving in different directions at different speeds, that at times, sitting in that cinema, it felt like I was in the tunnel in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory.
What is this, a freak out?
I learned the hard way that putting more ingredients on a pizza does not make it better. The best pizzas tend to have minimal toppings. What can happen with too much information is that elements start to cancel each other out. If you look back at the films that affected you most in your life, I'm willing to bet they were, at their core, quite simple, or the thing that affected you about them was quite simple. A lot of the problem of this is just not letting the movies breathe and allowing us to catch our breath. And no, we can't do that in the quiet talky scenes because they are too often informational instead of emotional. A great example of getting this right is Blade Runner 2049. This is a rich, detailed world that feels real and is no less dazzling, arguably more so, but with so much less information. And crucially, it lets you breathe, to catch up, and to process. Dune is the same way, not uncoincidentally by the same director, Denis Villeneuve. By contrast, the detail in Avatar reads as ideal instead of real. Detail is not more stuff, it's stuff that feels rooted in physics and backstory. Often something feels more real because it's less functional, less ideal, because that's how the real world is. As a result of the right kind of attention to detail, Dune and Blade Runner become more believable. With so much variation in Avatar, by contrast, all layered on top of each other and competing for our attention and all presented as equally perfect, I just don't believe it in the same way I do those other films. Now, all of this could be a matter of taste. I just love the visual language of Denis Villeneuve's films, so I don't think it's quite fair to say that too much information is the reason Avatar doesn't work. So, we keep on. Too much information isn't just about quantity, it's also about how the film focuses the viewer's attention. In other words, how it channels that information and prioritizes it. Focus is what the frame and the editing chooses to show us versus what it excludes. Focus is what stops so much detail from becoming just noise. Too often, Avatar is not framing something narrowly to help the viewer cut out the extraneous information coming at them. Instead, it actively keeps wide and lets you cull that information for yourself. It's the opposite to letting a moment breathe, which is allowing it to have our attention at the exclusion of everything else without being crowded out by other stuff. Now, the argument against this is that every audience member can have their own unique experience by choosing where to point their attention, the way you do in an aquarium. And it's a good argument. I like that filmmakers go wide sometimes. They give you detail and let you choose where to look. But if you do that, it naturally requires less story. So as an audience member, you are in effect creating your own narrative, the way a picture book allows that experience for a child. But a busy plot layered on top of a wide canvas robs you of that experience, of your imagination. The reason I think we're wired so much in Avatar films is really because everyone who worked on it is just so damn proud of the world that they've created, and fair enough. But you are constantly getting these big sweeping beauty shots to show you the majesty of this world, along with big sweeping music in case you're not getting it. It would have been that much more bold, I think, to create all that detail and let it be in the background, or caught in fleeting moments between shots. Not entirely, but used sparingly, it might have made the world feel more real, more believable. Because every time you show how special all this is, you're forcing that judgment on the audience instead of allowing them to find it for themselves. It becomes less and less their own experience. But again, this is a creative choice, and by its nature, it has a compelling argument against presenting a tapestry and letting you choose where to focus. So this, in all fairness, can't be called the problem with Avatar's cultural impact. Between Avatar films, when I'm not in front of one, I realized my brain thought of them as animated movies. In my head, they sat right next to all the Pixar films, which is obviously not what they are. It's more like real actors with digital skins, and it's made to be photorealistic. But I think it's that second part that I get snagged on. Sometimes it's photorealistic, but with reality altered by so many degrees, it often leaves photorealism behind. Even with all that detailed texture, I don't feel like these are real surfaces that I could lean on. I feel like they're video game surfaces. And strangely, even the live action people like Spider and the scientists feel digitally created too. The difference between animation and performance capture, which is what this is not just in how it's produced, but also the strange side effect it has on our brains. This is called the uncanny valley, which is not how off the digital recreation of something is, but how close it is. Weirdly, our brains reject it the more closer it gets if it can't get all the way there. Counterintuitively, I think Avatar would actually be more effective as an animation because it's further away from photorealism. Part of the reason Toy Story works so well is because it's stylized and our brains aren't fighting for actuality. Oddly, the uncanny valley is present even though the Na'vi are not human, despite being blue and striped and having little elf ears. But they are, of course, idealized humans. And I think it might be this, combined with the fact that it's actors performing the roles with their very human movements, that causes the disconnect. It's just another thing that likely wouldn't snag if these characters were animated. Truthfully, at no point do I feel like I'm getting an actual window onto an actual faraway planet, and it pains me to say it. I mean, I am the audience for this. I am a sci-fi fan, so I'm just willing it to happen. All that said, I don't think this is the reason Avatar works or doesn't work, because, like animation, it's up to me to submit to the form and go with it. So I kept looking. Could the sheer running time of these films be the problem? Fire and Ash is 3¼ hours long, and when you combine that with all the colour and texture and movement, it is in danger of all blurring into one and coming across like a giant screensaver that you can't turn off. I made a whole episode on the subject of long movies. Check it out if you want to go further, where I talk about what actually makes a movie long, and it's not running time. If you have watched that, you'll know that a movie feels long, not because of its runtime, but because of its felt time, which is stretched by all the moments the movie loses your attention. Somewhat counterintuitively, dazzling spectacle does not automatically hold our attention. In fact, it can do the opposite, being so overwhelming or wearing as to push us out of the zone. So, by the felt time metric, these films are way long and therefore alienating, preventing me from fully engaging, and I think that's an issue, but it's not the problem. It's not why it doesn't work. So I kept looking. There is something curious about the Na'vi. You don't really see old ones, and the young ones don't look so different to the grown-up ones. And you don't get all the sizes and shapes that you get in humans, all the variations of height and weight and health and life's wear and tear. Make no mistake, character variation lies as much in these physical traits as personality. A guy with an eye patch amongst people without an eye patch is a character before he even opens his mouth. And then the Na'vi open their mouth, and the lack of variation continues because their personalities aren't really distinct from each other either. They are on different personal journeys, and so their attitudes can be different from one another, but it's situational, and an emotional state which is plot-driven is not character, which means the characters are not really different outside their take on the plot moment they're in. They're not fundamentally distinct and interesting in their own right, which is what makes a character feel fleshed out and compelling. In other words, if you took away the plot, they wouldn't be so different to an NPC.
How's it hanging?
And what throws this into stark relief is when they are different, which tends to happen only with the bad guys. I found myself leaning forward, for instance, whenever Quaritch was on the screen, and the same with the Ash Queen. They were distinct and interesting and compelling in their own right, helped massively by the actors who are fantastic. I actually probably would have liked this movie a lot more if it was told from their point of view. Without the kind of variation we get in real life, which might be the most interesting thing about real life, the personalities of the characters we're supposed to identify with all start to feel samey. And it's this that finally led me up to the answer of what might be the actual problem with Avatar. And that is the central trait that all these characters have in common. Now, everything I've listed so far, you might argue, is a matter of taste. Many of those issues are contributing factors, but they aren't individually something I could point to and say, this is why Avatar as a movie universe doesn't have an impact beyond spectacle, which is the goal of this channel, to focus on the workings of good storytelling. But altogether, they did finally point me to what I think is the fault in that mechanism, and it can best be illustrated by comparing the Na'vi to Ewoks.
What's going on?
I don't know.
Historically, something curious happens when indigenous-like cultures are depicted on screen by traditional Western storytellers. Things get real noble real quick. The ever-reactive nature of cinema means that you're either misguidedly leaning into old-school tropes about indigenous-coded cultures or trying to lean the hell away from them. Either way, you somehow end up with the same thing: noble people. I'm not going to get into the politics of that here because that's not what this video is about. Needless to say, it's a big subject and I'm not about to fix it with a cute meme. No, I'm more interested in its dramatic effect. On this channel we deal with narrative mechanisms, and this is just another mechanism. Because what happens when you have a noble character, and it doesn't matter if it's an indigenous culture or an alien race or a king or a saint or an incorruptible rebel, is they are undramatic. In the absence of other balancing traits, nobility sucks all the interesting bits out of a character. And any scene that character is in. If drama were light, then a noble character is a black hole. Nobility is boring. This is not about the culture they represent, it's about the human contradictions that are removed from them. From the dramatic standpoint, the problem is not that noble characters are shown as good, it's that that goodness replaces interior struggle. Drama thrives on contradiction. In stories, pride is really only interesting if it comes before the fall. Sanctified characters are kryptonite to conflict, which applies if Avatar were about medieval monks or space Buddhists or post-apocalyptic vegans. I'm not judging Avatar as myth here, I'm judging it as drama because that's the level it's asking me to engage with over 3 films. The issue I have with it is not that the Na'vi are proud people, it's that they are ethically unanimous and morally unchallenged. So what, in God's name, can Ewoks teach the Na'vi? These little guys got a lot of hate back in the day because Star Wars went cute on fans and they did not like it. But putting the backlash on the shelf, along with Endor's own trope questions, what the Ewoks aren't is noble. Where the Na'vi are big, perfect and right, Ewoks are small, fallible and wrong. They mistake 3PO for a god, they plan to eat Han and Luke, they switch allegiances based on fear and awe, and they need to be convinced to help the cause. Why does this matter? Because it's more dramatic. Basically, it's more interesting, it's more relatable, and therefore more real. And size, comedy, and yes, even cuteness has a lot to do with it. It means that later success is earned. Their victory is improbable rather than inevitable. Because the Ewoks are not morally resolved, they can experience transformation, which is the essence of story. Whereas the Na'vi are spiritually aligned from the outset, and the story only confirms their worldview. They don't learn, they are only validated, and drama prefers learning to validation. Ewoks are mocked for being cute and funny, but their comedy is their humanity. They panic, they overreact, and they misunderstand, just like us. Look, I'm not pretending Ewoks are deep, fleshed out characters, and obviously the role they play is limited compared to the wide world of Avatar, but I use them to illustrate the point. And for those who I lost at Ewok, here's another useful comparison. At first glance, Black Panther might look like a noble culture fantasy too, and fall into the same trap as Avatar. It's morally aspirational, and Wakanda is positioned as right compared to the outside world, and of course T'Challa is noble. But the difference is he's not settled as a character. He starts out with all the usual ingredients. He's honourable and ethical and dutiful and deeply respectful of tradition, but crucially, those virtues have not yet been tested by contradiction. His worldview is inherited, not challenged, and the movie then goes on to dismantle moral certainty. The threat is internal as well as external and brings about change in both. Avatar presents a morally complete culture under threat. Black Panther presents a culture forced to confront itself. Instead of pre-validated nobility, we get nobility through interrogation, which leads to genuine transformation. And now we can identify. Which is why it feels dramatically alive as well as being mythic. Yes, I know I should have just led with the comparison to Black Panther instead of Ewoks, but James Cameron isn't the only one trading in spectacle. And testing nobility isn't the only way it can work in drama. Nobility can also work when it's tragic. In Braveheart, Mel Gibson's William Wallace is morally certain, ideologically pure, committed to freedom, and personally incorruptible. He's noble, but, and this is crucial, that nobility is constantly undercut by other traits. He's also reckless, repeatedly choosing escalation over survival. His crusade is born from grief, so he's emotionally driven, often at his own expense. He's politically naive, and his uncompromising nature alienates potential allies. So he is noble, but his nobility is volatile. It burns everything around him, including himself. In Braveheart, nobility leads to destruction. In Black Panther, nobility is challenged and revised. In Avatar, nobility is affirmed and preserved. It's about stasis, not contradiction or growth or tragedy. The problem isn't nobility. The problem is nobility without flaws or consequence or meaning. which, by the way, is why Fire and Ash is at its most interesting when it's depicting the Ash Queen. Her character is so effective in part because it's a departure from moral certainty and sanctified ideology. Nobility isn't undramatic by default. Look at Superman or Aragon or Captain America. But it becomes undramatic when it's not challenged or examined. The Ash Queen, William Wallace, Wakandans, and Ewoks are not morally perfect and are capable of error and therefore, in theory, change, which is a fundamental ingredient of good drama. My issue with Avatar isn't its worldview, it's that its central culture is morally resolved before the story even starts, which removes the friction that protagonists need to be interesting. When a culture is portrayed as already spiritually complete, the story can only admire it, not interrogate it. And beauty without moral conflict is spectacle, not drama. If Avatar has a fatal weakness, it's its cultural afterlife. It has spectacle and technical innovation and grand themes and a mythic landscape and box office success. But does it succeed as a durable movie touchstone, something that matters to audiences, that they return to and quote and reinterpret and argue over and emotionally engage with once the spectacle's over?
Bunker, this has gone far enough. Quite right, sir. Stop the boat.
I just want to take a moment here to say thank you to channel members. You literally make PILLARBOXER possible. If anyone else wants to join them and support what I'm doing here and get members only extras and early access with it, then click join below to learn more. And